we can't serve the kids in front of us well because we don't feel that alignment. And that's really what we mean by happy.
Hey there, class kickers, and welcome back to another episode of the Kick Some Class podcast, the show that's designed to help you, the educator, kick some class at home, in school, and in life. And today I have with me a very special guest, Suzanne Dailey. And Suzanne is an instructional coach. She's nationally board certified, a fellow of the National Writing Project, and author of the book Teach Happier This School Year, which we're going to be talking about today. She has her own blog and podcast and presents at conferences and workshops and all sorts of other good stuff. So Suzanne, welcome aboard. I'm really glad to have you.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, so as I said that, I'm like, everybody's bio can kind of get to be a tiny bit of a mouthful. So how, as we talk about work-life balance and families and the people that matter to us, how do you keep all those roles in check and in balance for yourself?
Well, I don't, Brian. And I don't know many people who really can do that. So, you had mentioned the book, and that's something we talk right off the bat of how do we navigate work-life balance?
Yeah.
And the really interesting part is it doesn't exist. So that's why you can't attain it and I can't attain it and anyone listening can't attain it. So it's a really small shift for me in thought and language. And I have tried to evolve away from work-life balance and move towards work-life satisfaction.
Nice.
Because as a teacher, but also as a mom and a wife and a friend and all the other roles that we play, it's very difficult for most of us to be balanced, but we can be satisfied in all of our roles. So I'm not balanced, but I'm satisfied in a joyful teacher and all the other roles behind that role for sure.
I love that. Joyfully imbalanced might be a way that I've been described as well. Not medically, no. But it's interesting because one of the things that as I started thinking about that word, I'm like, balance is not really the right word. I'm a science teacher at heart, and so this idea of balance is opposition, and I'm like, I think it's more about tension and understanding that there's a healthy tension between give and take and, serve and recharge and family and work, So maybe somebody out there is saying it's just semantics, but I think you hit on it. It's defining that language for yourself. And then that gives you, I don't know if you use the word freedom, but I kind of pick up on that. So I'm going to kind of transition here. Yeah, I was listening to another podcast and you had mentioned that you used to be a fourth grade classroom teacher. So
yes.
I have my experience of moving out of the classroom. I'm just curious, what was that like for you to pack up all the stuff and to watch that door close? Maybe for the last time, to transition to a new role?
It was really tricky, actually. And I believe that the universe was trying to protect me from that exact moment because I went into labor with my daughter earlier than I thought. And so I never had that moment, but I feel like the universe protected me because that would have been a whole lot for my teacher heart. So thankfully now in my role as an instructional coach, I still get to teach every day. I was actually just before this was in a fourth grade room. And on the day of recording, it's Valentine's Day. So it was electric in there. So that joy, I still get to capture that each and every day, whether it's a fourth grade room or kindergarten or up to sixth grade is primarily who I work with. But you're right, Brian. It's different when you have your own group in that classroom family. I miss that terribly. But it's something I get to rekindle in just a little bit of a different way as I'm around our 15 elementary schools in our school district.
Yeah, and that's just crazy to me. I mean, where I am, we have 3 elementary schools that feed into one middle and one high. And I'm same deal. I came out of the classroom. I'm 25 years in, so I've been out once before, and this time about a year and a half, and I work K-12. And so it's weird. I actually had a teacher ask me today. I taught 5th grade with Tinkercad, and sugar the kids up and then run away and send them on to the next class, right? But I thought it was funny that a teacher said, what do you miss? And so I'm passing that on to you. But, I thought I miss that they know me, but I don't know them quite the same. And it does scratch the itch of being with the kids, but Yeah, it's a trade off again. So it's interesting. I'm kind of knew the answer from my experience. I figured as I heard you in another interview talk about how much you love
Hmm.
your job, and just maybe you can just key in on that for a second, to go from the classroom where you're making a difference in students, to step out and to know you're making a difference for students, but maybe by proxy. What's how does that work for you?
It's just it's a really different intensity, right? Instead of being so hyper focused on your 27 fourth graders, I get to be focused on really thousands of
Yeah,
kids every year. And so the thought of that impact, it's a different type of impact, certainly. It's not as personalized as you would with your students who I always say, like, we live together, you guys. Like, we're just, right? You just spend so much time together. So it's certainly a different intensity, but it's still really rewarding thinking that the impact could, reach more than just beyond your 27 kids. It could reach hundreds or thousands of kids a year.
yeah, I love that. And it was hard, but I think in the first like week, I made that realization, like, oh, I don't have 120 students. I have, yeah, so many more now. And I don't know. So yeah, it's consolation maybe in those early days, but, so I have a confession time. And I mentioned this to you, that like, I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but I did something that for eons we've been saying, don't judge a book by its cover. And I saw your cover, this, and you know how this happened, kind of rolled out on Twitter. There it is,
Yeah,
Teach
there she
Happier.
is.
And I was like, how could this is exactly along my stream. And so I don't actually know now, if I've rightfully judged that idea of that, if you are happier, you are better. And I've said this to people. I always hated the cliche, well, let's do what's right for kids. Well, what's right for kids is a happy, healthy, rested, inspired, and connected teacher. That's one of the major things. And after that, of course, a bunch of others. But so how close did I come to the content of the book, maybe, and the mission that you're on, spreading that news?
I mean, chef's kiss, Brian. You
All
did it, right?
right.
And we all have walked into our classrooms when we are feeling rested, whole, balanced, aligned. We're really good teachers those days. And we've
Yeah.
also had the days where we come in, we're exhausted. We're like a cat with a ball of string, like, whoa, right? And we can't serve the kids in front of us well because we don't feel that alignment. And that's really what we mean by happy. It's not tra la la, good
Hmm.
vibes only. That's just not realistic. It means, are we content, aligned, balanced? Are we understanding what those small shifts in our thoughts, language, and actions are that help us feel that way? Because what we uncover in the book is that, unfortunately, it's an inside job. I
Yeah.
can't rely on my partner, my kids, my students, my colleagues. Nobody can do that important work for me. I can be a part of my own rescue, and it's a real inside job. You were talking about balance earlier, Brian. It's not found, it's created.
Yeah.
And that's a real buzzkill, right? Like, we just kind of want to wake up some days and have things feel good.
Mm.
And some days they do, but most days they don't. And it's not because we're doing life wrong. It's actually, I believe, because we're doing it right, and we're leaning into
Mm.
our relationships and our work and our homes, and that requires a lot of energy and capacity. And some days we have that, and realistically, some days it's harder to have that, right?
Yeah, man, I'm like, like high five through the interwebs, right? Like, I found that so many times, and I wish I could remember the guy who said it. And it's that one of the most freeing revelations is that no one's coming. No one's coming to save you. And soon as you said it, like it maybe it isn't a great thing, except that it's incredibly empowering to realize it's on you, right? Like
Mhm.
I talked about this, the hero's mindset, that as soon as you take ownership and control of the fact that you may have woken up on the wrong side of the bed, but those kids deserve your best. And look, there's no shame in the fact that days you don't have it. One co-teacher that I work with, he goes, guys, I don't have it today.
Mhm.
And you might want to just give me some space. I'm going to do the same for you. We'll come back at it next time. And I'm like, to me, I think that modeling that for kids rather than saying, you know, I'm going to do my best and I'm probably going to fail and I may not treat kids well. Why don't just come out and say it and model that normalcy, right? And then say, we're going to try this again, a kind of growth mindset. So I love that idea. And it moves you away from victimhood
Mhm.
and blaming somebody else and complaining and just saying, no, I can make a slight shift. And I'm hearing some, like, I studied some neuro linguistic programming, and that's what I'm hearing in there is this idea of you have a state of being and you get to control it. And as soon as you realize that, the shift is just one of awareness and choice.
Mhm.
And sometimes that choice isn't easy, right? But so I'm curious if you have, this is totally off script now, that not that I have
Yeah.
ever really used one, but have you studied any of that, like, neuro linguistic programming, type stuff?
Yes, and some of that science is referenced in the book just so that people didn't think I was just making things up, but it's some people could hear that like, "Oh my gosh, it's up to me." And that could be a very overwhelming, thing to think about, but it's actually so
Yeah.
empowering that we get to determine not everything in our life, certainly, right? Positive psychologists say about 10 to 20% is
Yeah.
fixed. I cannot um, undo health diagnosis from people that I care about. I cannot bring people back in my life who I love and who have passed away. But that leaves 80 to 90% for me to impact and influence how I'm going to navigate through that season, right?
Yeah.
Um, the time that of the book was the hardest few years of my life. One of the biggest losses was I lost my mom. Now I can't change that,
Mm-hmm.
but I absolutely get to decide how I'm going to carry on her legacy, right? And so I can't rely on anybody else in my life, whether professionally or personally, to do that important work for me. That's my work, that's my job, but it actually allows me to move through that really challenging season with as much empowerment and autonomy as possible. And that's a really great way to feel in a really hard time.
Yeah, yes, it is. It really is almost like this paradox, right? Like
Yeah.
the most difficult challenges that we go through. So my book came out of a period of burnout where,
Mhm.
my daughter was born after 17 years of infertility, and then I found myself in the worst health of my life. But it was that it was I was given a reason to fix it,
Mhm.
and then an ultimatum, sort of like, dude, do you want to miss out on this? Do you want her to miss out on this? And it was that was sort of that slap in the face to say, I can't blame the job. I made choices to do certain things that were death spiral to my health and, awareness and all that other stuff. So I found that empowerment is, it's not easy, but once you realize that you can control it, at least you realize, oh, I can do something, so
We
good.
get a
And
say in how we recalibrate,
we
right? We do.
there you go. So,
Yeah.
I went and checked out your podcast, and it's a really interesting format for me because you use these short sort of reflection and action pieces, and those have been two really cornerstones for me coming through, like taking some time to think about, end game, who do I want to be? How do I want to be remembered? What kind of dad, what kind of husband, what kind of teacher, and I think a lot of people call that a midlife crisis. I always called it a midlife gift. And I wish could have scheduled it 20 some years ago, because then to read the benefits. But I'm just curious, like, how did you arrive at that format, of, they're all around 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, I try to make it no more than 7 minutes because, well, we're busy educators and we've got a finite amount of time and most people listen to it on their way to work on Monday morning, which is really empowering to just
Wow.
try and get in a pretty good we say headspace or heart
Yeah.
space as possible. And it's exactly what you said, Brian. It's a story. I try to put a little bit of science or research in there to give it a little credibility, and then it's a 2-degree invitation, and it's a real small shift in our thoughts, language, or actions because very few of us have the capacity for a 180-degree anything,
Yeah.
right? Like we're looking for a solid 7.
Yeah.
What I mean? Like,
Right.
we're going to do a complete 7.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
understanding the limited bandwidth that most of us have, especially this time in the school year,
Mm.
we're tired. A lot of us, there's been sickness going around in our classrooms or our homes. And so keeping it short and concise. And then what's really neat too is when some educators then bring those small shifts to their students
Yeah.
and start sharing some of those things that have resonated with them into their classroom families or around their dining room tables, which is just really neat.
Awesome. And it's just one of those things that like, whatever led you to do that, to add to the content of the book, to get at that deep heart need to share, and to make a difference in that way. It's always cool to see that next, like the cascading impact that you have. It's so cool. So I really enjoyed that. I gotta tell you, the first one I saw when I looked after we set up the book was the monotasking. And I was like, oh, man, like, how is this a thing? And I'm, again, like I heard you say, this is a new term for you, but
Yeah.
this is what life used to be before we got into this world. I'm sure every generation has had their version of multitasking. But yeah, the same ideas with like Cal Newport talks about what happens to us and when we get distracted. And so I thought they're really good for anybody that's, listening, hasn't checked it out. All that stuff will be down in the show notes afterwards, but just very concise, actionable, small shifts you can make. And I love that you said 2%, it's like, over the long haul, a small shift over time makes a huge difference. I live in a military community, and a buddy of mine was a former, sniper. And you talk about like, you can be off by a little bit in the close range, you don't see it. But man, as time goes by, a little shift in your health, a little shift in your mindset, a little shift here and there makes a huge difference. And so I love that. And so I'm like a super tech nerd, have been most of my life. What you're talking about is meditative and maybe it might seem a little altruistic almost, to say use a technology tool for this. Have you found any or seen anything that are like, as you travel around, tools that people can use to help in that way?
To help with
Well, maybe,
implementing some of this?
yeah, implementing something like that or finding that headspace, heart space, to just center yourself and make sure you're ready to bring your best self. Man, this is sounding awful guru-ish, but I'm okay with it, on a Monday morning.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm not a very big techie person at all, but I think that's why some of the ideas I share are underwhelming and people are like,
Mm,
"Oh, I could do that." So the upcoming podcast this week is how do we use our reminders app to help us strengthen our social relationships? Because that's what positive psychologists say, 100% of happy people, happy meaning content, aligned, balanced, have strong social relationships. So how do we use our reminders app for that? Or how can we use simply our timer on our phone
mm,
to either hyper focus on a task or to actually disengage from a task and force ourselves to not hyper focus and get into a state of what I also learned the phrase toxic productivity.
yeah.
So just really, things that most of us have access to, how do we kind of use them in a different way to help us make these 2-degree shifts?
Awesome. Yeah. I think there's times when you need to pull the plug and there's times where it just delete social media off your phone or whatever it is for you, right? You'll
Sure.
find that there's little increments that you can do. So it's good stuff. Books. I'm going to shift to this one. So, we were laughing about this. I probably read or listen to 200 books a year and buy way more than that, unfortunately,
Yeah.
for our budget, so, but there are a couple, and I mentioned, the ones over my shoulder that really made a difference for me in coming to that, both writing a book, but also just getting to the place where I had something worth writing about. So I'm just going to ask, like for you, are there specific books that really pushed you over the edge or gave you that kick that said, oh yeah, I got to do this?
I would say there's 2 books that really stand out. The first is The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor. He's just such a brilliant teacher of the science behind happiness and thriving during times of adversity. And he has all these studies and experiments that he's done at Harvard that are it just makes it so applicable and practical. And so he's one of my favorite teachers. And then, of course, I mean, it would be anything written by Brene Brown, but
Mm,
The Gifts of Imperfection was a big moment for me, reading and rereading and highlighting and circling and just being stuck on some of her brilliant thoughts of that's the language. That's exactly what that feels like, you
yeah.
know? So she just has found such a beautiful way of putting language to things that you kind of think are unique to you, but she helps us see that really no feeling is unique. Everything's pretty universal.
Yeah, well, man, and that's kind of there's another comforting thought too, like especially in the it's humbling on the positive side where you have this like super bright idea and you're like, yeah, no, you're not the first one to have that. But on the dark side, right, you're not alone. A bunch of other people have gone through this, and so it's really interesting. I love Brene Brown, but when I would listen, I'm constantly pausing and then taking my own little tangent, which I love. That it's like if I were ever going to write something else again, I feel like I'm never going to have writer's block if I listen to a few people. Brene Brown is one of them,
Mhm.
So and I wrote down the Have a Disadvantage, and that will probably get purchased shortly after we hang up today, and I'll have to explain the purchase to my wife. But I love that, and it's I don't know if you struggled with this, but we it's like, oh, they already said it.
Mhm.
But and this is, I don't know if anybody out there, a lot of teachers probably have a book in them, and it might be a children's book, it might be self-help, it might be pedagogy, I don't know, but they didn't say it as you, right? Like you bring something that only you can bring, and there are people in this world where we're hyper connected. I mean, I know you're in the Philadelphia area, I'm almost in Canada, a few hours to your north, but and just met online, and I've connected with people from all over the world the same way. You just don't know who's going to need it said the way you say it. So it's just good stuff. So, I'm going to shift to my three, like these is, if I'm doing a study here, these are the questions
Okay.
I'm asking. So, but I'll preface it with this one. I'm not really sure. What's your year total in education?
22.
Awesome. Okay. So
Hmm.
in the 22 years reflecting back, I know I did not feel prepared, or I was aware of how ill prepared I was when I got in the job. Unfortunately, that almost autopsy is not
We
always
all
helpful.
feel that, right? Yes,
Yeah, right.
yes.
So what's something you wish, if you could turn back time to, get some 80s hits in my head again, what would you have wanted somebody to prepare you better for stepping into that classroom?
It's so funny you asked that because just last week I was talking to pre-service teachers at my alma mater, Niagara University. And I tried to tell them, I said, the bad news is you won't know this until you have experience, but so much of it is noise.
Hmm.
And it's really hard to discern what's noise and what isn't. And you're good. That's going to take some time to figure out. But that's the gift that we have with experiences. We're able to now say, nope, none of that does
Yep.
not matter. Here's the small piece that does, right? And so if it is going to move a student forward, this is my litmus test. If it moves a student forward academically, socially, emotionally, yes, that's a full body yes.
Mm.
If it's not, it's probably just noise. And it's hard in your first couple years because everything's coming at us so quickly we can't discern what needs immediate attention and focus and intense, so everything's intense and everything's
Yeah.
overwhelming. And,
Yeah.
that's why you need really trusted people around us to help guide us and help us silence a lot of that noise.
Boy, I wish I could remember the book. I always get it confused. Chip and Dan Heath, if you look at some of their work,
Oh, make it stick.
I don't know if it's that book or not, but
Mm,
it's the Whirlwind and the Wig, and it could be Franklin Covey as well as another book I read in that same time frame, and they talk about that, the wildly important goal and the whirlwind, and we get caught up in this whirlwind of things that need to be done, and we miss out on what really is the main thing. We've all heard that old saying, but
sure.
man, that's so true. And I noticed that it's even, I, I love that you said it's a gift, and man, you're probably a little more positive than I am on this one. It's a gift of having that experience, right? And I found that you either receive that gift with optimism, positivity, and maybe retrospective kind of thought, or you get cynical. And that just like, that's one of the things that breaks my heart is the veteran teachers have this phrase. If this ever comes out in writing, I'm like, TM this moment here, which is like, I feel like I want to write something that says seasoned doesn't have to mean salty. And so many teachers, as they get seasoned, it just comes across as like, ugh, like, man, you need a break. And so, but yeah, like, that's so good. It's so good. A lot of it's just noise. So maybe you have answered that. What is that advice? That's the advice you'd give new teachers. Okay. So I'll 2 for 1 here. We'll move on to the third one, which is,
okay.
So much is shifting in education. And a lot of people are trying after the pandemic to get back to a normal that, in my opinion, wasn't working. So as you look forward, what are the shifts that you would say, like, man, this is what we need to capitalize. Here's where we need to double down. Like, what are those shifts that you're seeing that this is where we need to go, and this is what we need to focus more on?
Well, I certainly think we did we're learning more, right? I learned that the Greek, I think this is right. The root word of crisis is to sift. And so while we were in the pandemic, we sifted a lot, right? And a lot of things fell away. So what's still in that little sifter, I guess?
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we have to focus in on. And so I think some things that we got right during the pandemic and all the like, as we were trying to navigate that, was we recognized how important it was to see the person behind the student. We have to recognize that these human beings in front of us, whether they are 5 or they are 18, they need a lot on top of just academic support. And so what I think did a really good job of doing is get very creative of how do we help kids feel seen, heard, and supported. That's what we need to continue doubling down on so that we can teach them how to be really great readers, writers, mathematicians, citizens, etc.
Yeah.
When we see the kid behind the student. And we have to do that with our colleagues too. We have to see the person behind the principal, counselor, colleague. That's how we make positive, permanent change.
That's awesome. I just last night I saw this another guy I love. He's in the life coach kind of space. His name is Steve Chandler, and he said that we need creative relationships and courageous action, and that when you get, and I'm thinking of Marilee Adams' book, Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. If you haven't read that one, it's another excellent book. And
writing it down.
So she talks often about this idea of if you think you know the answer, then you aren't going to grow. It's the learner versus the judger path, she calls it. But so the idea of looking at another person instead of judging that what they're going through or what they're thinking, I'm like, man, but that takes maturity. I'm not so sure I want to do that, but then you have a choice, right? So if you get creative about finding that information, and then you got to be courageous with what you do with it. Love that. So, Awesome. I really appreciate this great conversation. I just want to give you an opportunity to plug all the stuff, right? So the book again and socials, anything where can they find you? How can they connect more?
Thanks, Brian. So the easiest place is SuzanneDailey.com, but you can find Teach Happier This School Year on Amazon or ASCD. And you can follow me on Twitter at Daily Suzanne. And then everything else on socials is just called Teach Happier. So we've got a Facebook group, Instagram. So come join us. And it's just a really wonderful community of rational optimists. There's no toxic positivity. I promise you. I won't let it happen.
Awesome. Rational optimist. Love it. Yes. I love it. Well, Suzanne, thank you so much. And, you guys all know that I'm going to get an extra little plug in here for you. So regardless of what's going on, it is up to you to take this episode to teach happier and get out there and kick some class. So we will catch you guys in the next one.